Hi there, and welcome to my rear shock replacement project on my 2009 Honda Pilot. This next section, I could fast forward through it or do some editing to make it look like it went quicker, but I'm not going to. You need to know that removing this bottom bolt on your shock, if it is corroded, is very difficult. And I'm going to show you a couple of different ways that you can get it out if it is so corroded that you cannot fully remove it. And that's where it kind of fakes you out, because as you'll see here, I'm able to partially remove it, but not get it out all the way. I would also add that if you are trying to attempt this by hand and you don't have a good quality impact driver, I'm using a Milwaukee half-inch impact driver with 1,300 foot-pounds of torque. Man, you're gonna have a difficult time. You need to get the right tool, and I recommend that if the bottom bolt on your shock is stuck like mine was, and you don't own one of these or you can't borrow one, you go and rent it. Now it's wet around the bolt because I've given it a couple of healthy doses of penetrating oil. And yeah, you just have to be patient. What I'm doing here is I'm taking it back as far as it'll go, and then I'll put it back in again. And I'm taking it back and I'll put it back in, and eventually I could feel that it was gonna give up, that I was winning this fight. But even with that, it would only come out part way, because any corrosion on the bolt won't make it through the bottom of the shock itself. There just isn't enough clearance. So what I did is I put it all the way back in again, and I cut the tip off. Now the reason I did this is because I want to make the bolt as short as possible, just in case I'm not able to use a drift against it and punch it out all the way, which is what happened on the other side. I was able to get it undone, but I could not pull it all the way out because the corrosion was preventing it from sliding through the bottom of the shock. And I put a punch against there and I beat on it with a hammer for 10 minutes straight, and I could not get it to budge. And so I had to resort to a slightly different but similar method that I'm employing here. You can see I'm trying to pull it out and it won't go. So I put a smaller bolt in there, give it a couple whacks with my hammer, and out it came. Well, here it is in all its glory, and if you look, you can see the buildup and corrosion at the back of the threads there, which is why it wouldn't pull out of the shock and why I had to use a drift and punch it out. Now, if you're wondering why I cut the tip off, for one thing, it made it easier to plant something against the end of it and drift it out, but there was another reason too. On the other side, I got it out this far, and then I just proceeded to cut it off right there. What I should have done is put it all the way back in again and cut the tip off, because after cutting it off and just tapping it back in 1/8 of an inch or so it would clear, it gave me a lot of grief trying to pull the bottom of the shock out, because it was just 1/8 of an inch or so too long. Because you'll look here at this bolt and you can see I didn't cut the tip off. So just in case I would have had to do that with the side that I'm currently working on, I thought I'd save myself a little grief and make it as short as possible by cutting the tip off. And once that bottom bolt is out of the way, the rest of the removal was fairly straightforward. Up top here we have a couple of 14mm, a bolt and a nut. And if you're gentle with the impact gun, you can take them off without damaging. Just make sure to spray them ahead of time with penetrant, some type of penetrating oil. I hit them yesterday and again today because this was a vehicle that was exposed to a lot of road salt. There was quite a bit of corrosion. You can also see on the shock here that this one is completely blown. This is off the right rear. All that oil and grease on the side of it there has leaked out from the inside of the shock. I was able to reuse the hardware, but before I did, I took it to the wire wheel and just cleaned up the threads. And then I applied anti-seize compound because if somebody comes in here at some point in time after me to remove these, I want to make their life as easy as possible. Something else I'd like to mention is that I started these by hand, and then I didn't take an impact to them at all, really. I wanted to use a ratchet and do them by hand because in this way I'd be able to feel if I'm cross-threading or not. And yeah, you never want to cross-thread a nut or a bolt because then you're just giving yourself more work to do. And by the way, the final torque setting on these upper bolts for the shock is 33 pounds.
Here's our clunking.
These rear sway bar bushings are also well worn.
So I'm also going to replace these bushings. It's a trained eye to be able to tell which is the old one and which is the new one.
So before I said goodbye to this project, I replaced the bushings on the rear sway bar as well as the shock. So you got a new bushing there, and there's the new shock.
You are seeing daylight because I had to pause and get a couple of parts, namely the bolts that I had to cut out in the first place. Not expensive, about $7 Canadian a piece. Once again, I'm applying a little bit of anti-seize to the threads. And in order to get the bottom of the shock to align with the holes, I just had to lift the whole business a little bit with the jack. It's nice that they give you a nice pointy taper in the end of these bolts, which helps greatly in terms of popping them in. But before I go to town on that, I'm going to check the other side to make sure that things are aligned. Okay, that shock is in place, but before I torque that to spec, I will go and install the other side. Once again, anti-seize on the bolt. This one lined up without any violence whatsoever. Okay, with that in place, it's time to torque the lower bolts. The upper bolts have already been torqued to 33 foot-pounds, and these lower ones are 47 foot-pounds. taking it for a test drive around the field. The clunk is gone.